Hello there, welcome to the channel, welcome back perhaps, and we have another little bit of experimentation to share with you today, once again involving the POG2, as was the case for our last little adventure too, but this one actually is the reason that we have gotten the POG2 out of the proverbial mothballs to try, and you will see that we have as our basic chain here our contrabass clarinet samples going into the float, going into the POG2. We've got our Fuzz, the behringer brassmaster there. The other stuff is not going to be so relevant right now. We do have the nightsky and the R1 all set up there, but we will not be using those. But what this comes down to is the parts of the contra sounds that we like to be able to remove, or at least have the option of removing, and that comes down to some of the kind of attack tonguing that happens, and also the key noises. And our traditional way of doing that has been with a filter. Originally we used the filter on the Enzo to experiment with that, but then we ended up buying the float for ourselves, and as it so happens the sensitivity set to its maximum on the float is exactly what we need, and what that does is it takes the edge off some of the intensity of the tonguing, which is particularly relevant when it hits the fuzz, and also relevant when it hits the fuzz, it takes off the key sounds. So that is how we've been approaching it on our larger pedal boards. We've had the two different channels of the float being used for two different kind of reasons. On the one channel it was because it was leading off to the fuzz that we used there, and on the other channel it was because it was leading to our freeze pedal, the Electro-Harmonix Super Ego Plus. And basically what we were finding was that the Super Ego would latch onto the tonguing and sustain the tonguing of the contrabass rather than the note, and so that enabled us to, as well as removing key sounds, use the freeze pedal effectively. So the float has been working very effectively for that. It's been making us very happy with the fact that it's the maximum sensitivity that does the job for us. We will be demonstrating that shortly, but what happened that made us think about this was that Electro-Harmonix also released recently a pedal called the Pico Swello, which is an attack filter, or a swell as the name suggests. And basically our thought was, well, I wonder if the if that would serve us better than the float has. And it was then a real pleasure to discover that it was based on the attack feature of the POG2, which we are already in possession of and can already play around with. So basically what we're looking at today is whether there is any benefit in using the attack function, I guess it's the swell function of the POG2, over the float. So that's the explanation. Let's get on to the practical side of things. We have a sample here on our Wally Plus that demonstrates the difficulties inherent in just using the raw sound of the contra with the tonguing and the key clicks. It should be noted that the filter doesn't compensate for key clicks that happen during a note. So for example, if we're playing a phrase where there are key clicks going between notes, those are still included. But changing keys when we weren't playing was producing key clicks. And again, of course, there's the tonguing. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a listen to the sample without, and then with the fuzz, and then we're going to do the same, listening how it sounds with the float, and then adding the fuzz after the float. Then we will get to the POG2 after that. So here is our sample. Let's dive in. There we go. So you can hear how that is very obviously not necessarily an undesirable thing, but a unique thing, more of a sound. I mean, all music is sound, but it's more of a percussive sound than a pitched sound. We could very easily find ways to use that, and we have found ways to use that, but we don't want it to be a consistent thing. So now I'm going to play it one more time. I'm going to add the float, and then I'm going to add the fuzz again. So here we go. There we go. So you can see how that is in many ways a huge difference. We've been able to completely cut out the key clicking, and what's interesting there is that you can actually see the key clicks register a little bit with the filter, but the filter is not opening fast enough in order to make the key clicks register. And then of course that means that we have a much more smooth sound with the fuzz. The one thing that you can hear is that there is definitely like the filter is audible. You can hear the attack of the notes, and I will demonstrate that very quickly. So hopefully it's clear what I'm talking about there, that we get that wah slight effect. And it can also be quite good fun to add the... we haven't done this in a little while, so we don't remember the exact setting, but like adding the resonance on that can be quite good as an effect in itself as well. So that's a thing. Now, that to me is a very, very worthwhile payoff if you want, because it is much nicer to have that slight fade in and to be able to cut off the harshness of the tonguing that sometimes happens, and also the key clicks. I don't mind that payoff in the least. What it is also worth looking at, though, is the fact that there is some change in tone when we use the filter. And I'm going to switch to a different sample here. First of all, we'll turn this off. This is just a held lowest C. And of course, you know, it being the lowest C, it has the most overtones. That's also going to show us where the frequencies are being cut. So here we go. I'm sure you can hear that. So basically it's the headroom. And with the fuzz. And you can hear that in, for example, let's pull up our mid-range sample. So I should say bass. It's the mid-range of the instrument, but this is the bass range of the contrabass clarinet, where you can hear that there is also a cutting of the headroom there. Not hugely noticeable, but yeah, I mean, very negligible, if at all noticeable, in that higher register. But it's still something that, you know, we love the low notes on the clarinet, and we do want them to have as much headroom as possible. However, that, to our mind, is a perfectly acceptable payoff for the level of control that it gives us over the sounds that go into our signal chain. Plus, the volume thing here gives us good control of, like, we can mute the signal from here between or at the end of performances or whatever else. Okay, that brings us to the POG2 and a similar situation that we've got going here. Now, one thing it's worth noticing is that there is a similar payoff inherent in the POG2. One of the things that it's worth noticing, dry FX here applies these effects to the dry signal, the dry output. So like when it's red, it applies the attack. When it's green, it applies the attack and the filter. When it's yellow, it applies all three: attack, filter, and detune. What we will need to do is, at the very least, turn it on to red to make this relevant. But have a listen, and you will hear that as is, with the POG engaged, there's not really that much change. Okay, we're back on our lowest note here. Maybe a slight change, but when we add the this channel here, simply by pushing that button to the red, then there is a change. So just have a listen to this. Turn this on. Very obvious, right? And then with fuzz. Yeah, I don't think that needs any more demonstration. That's pretty clear. So already, I mean, first of all, it's worth noticing that that's not an unpleasant addition there, that it actually is quite a nice tone to be able to apply. But already, even just to use the attack, we're dealing with a change in the tone, which I think it's fair to say is far more pronounced with the POG than it is with the float. So that as a given in that particular equation, let's put that on and keep that on now. In fact, I don't think it makes that much difference if we have all three going there. And let's see how this attack sounds, first of all, without the fuzz. Now, let's go back to our previous sample. And we'll see how the attack sounds. Still getting it. Still getting the keys. Not getting the keys now. A little there. a little. Okay, worth noting that we are getting still a little bit of the key attack there. And also, I mean, it has to be said that tone, while not unpleasant, is definitely not something that we would want to be our default. Just a lot more high end, a lot less bass presence. I mean, that could be compensated for with dry signal, I do not doubt. At the same time, though, so far, very much the float is on top. Okay, let's play around with the attack a little bit. I mean, we know that we were still getting it when it was halfway up here, that we were still getting the key sounds. That mostly got rid of it to what I think would be an acceptable degree if you had some other effects afterwards, especially, that were creating sounds that would mask it a bit more. However, let's see what would be an acceptable thing. I'm going to leave the fuzz on for this because it's quite pleasant as a way of telling whether we're getting the key clicks. It certainly makes it more obvious. So here we go. There, you can hear it. Hear it there. Yeah. Yeah, pretty obvious. Hear it there. Still audible. Okay, so I mean, we've pretty much got it maxed out there. I mean, it's only just like one little line below the highest point, and you can still hear it. I mean, we could probably get away with it. And also at that point, the length of the attack is just a little bit longer than I think I would want. So, I think it is fair to say as a conclusion that we are happy with the float, that the float is what we are good with. I mean, I'm assuming that the Pico Swello responds the same. It does have a filter built into it as well, but I see that more as like changing the tone of the instrument going into it, which, you know, not to say that that couldn't be good, but I don't think it'll be changing the nature of the attack at all, the nature of the swell. So, we have already, as far as the POG2 is concerned, we've already done a lot of experimentation with these. So I think one perhaps more positive note to finish on is that there are undoubtedly some useful tones to be had. So, like, taking that as pretty much our position for the attack, if we want to cut out the harsher tonguing and the key noises, let's see what we can do with the LP filter and the detune going through the fuzz, because this is still valid as a tone machine, you know. And, you know, that's not even mentioning how fucking great the octaves are, if you haven't seen our previous couple of videos on this. Okay, let's go to our... which sample shall we use? I'm gonna suggest let's go to the bass range of the contra, which is generally where things tend to be most easily identifiable, and we can expand to the full range of the instrument if we want to later. So here is our sample. Let's switch this off for now. Then we will add the POG, and then we will add the fuzz, and then we will play around a little bit. Here we go. Seems to be a sweet spot for the detune. Nice. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of our experimentation here. I mean, yeah, there's some lovely stuff to be found in that effects bank of the POG2. However, we are more than satisfied with how the float is working for us at the moment, in terms of giving us the sounds that we want and don't want from the contra going into the pedals. Well, I hope this has been interesting and enjoyable for you too, at least as interesting and enjoyable as it's been for us. The project advances and there is still more experimentation to be done, but in the meantime, take care.